we're talking about the human mind, brain, nervous system in its architecture, the way that it's built as a servo mechanism, and the way that neurons are connected together in order to achieve very complex self-correcting decision-making processes and systems. But the problem, as I've said to you earlier, is that we can't interact with those neurons directly. We can't poke electrodes into the client's brain and rewire a few neurons, and now that their self-belief or their self-esteem has been rewired. We don't currently have the technology to do that, so we need some way of we can understand how these systems are working at the deeper level, and we can make pretty good predictions about the kind of odd side effects that will arise from conflict. But we can't interact with these systems directly. We have to do that through some sort of user interface. And NLP is as good a user interface as any. I think the difference between working at practitioner and at master practitioner level is that at practitioner level, you believe the user interface is what's really happening. Like on your computer, when you drag a little folder icon to the dustbin, or you drag a little document folder, inside the metal box of your computer, there isn't really a little folder with a piece of paper in it. There isn't a little person typing away inside there. So at practitioner, we're acting as if that user interface, the technique or the ritual, the recipe that we've created is what's really happening. It's like they really are integrating these images, and they are, integrating these states, or whatever kind of metaphor we want to use. As a master practitioner, we know that's not what's really happening. We understand what's really happening in terms of the behavior of the mechanisms, the interconnected neurons, the very complex decision-making networks. And we're using that knowledge to base our sense of direction and the approach that we're going to take with a client or a person that we're working with. And we're conscious that we're going to do that in a way that makes sense to them. So we're going to create a way of performing what it is that we do, a performance that is meaningful or impactful or relevant or appropriate for that person who we're working with, whilst at the same time understanding that what we're really doing is working at the deeper level of these interconnections and conflicts. So when we're resolving conflict with the NLP, and we always are, whenever we're working with any kind of change process, then it's useful to bear this metaphor of the air conditioning and competing systems, but also to realize that in the architecture of the nervous system, it's not a metaphor. It really is how we're built. And therefore, all the design principles that we use when we are building self-correcting systems equally apply to when we are designing human systems. And so I think as an NLP Master Practitioner, it's important that you take some time to get your head around these concepts and how these sorts of ideas work in practice, and keep them in mind as you're working with people and you're observing the process of change in people. Because that's going to really help you to understand and be much more precise and efficient in the way that you are bringing about the process of change. And ultimately what you're doing is bringing people always to that lowest energy point of homeostasis, that lowest energy point of balance, where that person can expend the minimal effort in order to achieve the objective that they're looking for. I remember a client telling me many years ago that he was working in a stressful corporate finance job, and every year, and this is quite common for people in the financial services industry, he would think, right, I'll take this year's bonus check and that's it, then I'm leaving, I'm getting away from this lifestyle, I'm moving out the city, and so on. And every year the bonus check arrives, and what happens is they stay, though I think, well, let's give it another month, and then, well, I'll wait till next year's bonus check, and the cycle goes over and over again. And this guy said to me that he was going to take his next bonus check, and then he was going to leave, and he was going to move to Jamaica and open a diving school. Now, going from a high-pressure finance job in the city to living on a beach in Jamaica and teaching people how to scuba dive, that's a massive swing in the system. That's That's a huge overcorrection. There's so much energy has gone into keeping the system in this artificially high energy state. Now the system's going to swing. It's like a pendulum that has been kept so high for so long. Now it's going to swing right the other way. And what will happen is, over a period of time, that pendulum will swing back until it's just making these tiny, tiny little adjustments. But it takes time to get there. We don't go from this high energy state straight to a zero energy state. That's why people spend a lot of money, go on these spiritualist, self-discovery, Zen kind of retreats, have a wonderful time, and then go straight back to this again. Because they need time to readjust. And literally people say that they need time to recenter or to find their center. That's a very interesting choice of words as a metaphor for finding the center of balance, the center of gravity of any sort of system. If you're trying to carry something big, if you don't have it balanced exactly on your shoulder, it will feel 10 times heavier. You take a moment to get that thing balanced, it will be effortless to carry, because that's the lowest energy state for it. So I think helping people get to that low energy state is a very powerful piece of work that we do. Now, it's not our place or our position really to be the arbitrator, to tell somebody what's good for them. That's going to create other kinds of conflict. So what we've got to do is find the arbitrator within them. And one of the metaphors that I often hear for the internal arbitrator is the word values. So people would say, oh, you've got to make a values-based decision, or I do values-based coaching. Well, everything we do is values-based. In that, values is just a word that describes these higher level rules that will arbitrate at times of conflict. So, for example, if you've got a job that you hate and you really want to leave and start your own business, but you feel like you can't afford it and you've got to pay the bills and you've got to provide security for your family, then you will put up with a stressful environment at work. So the arbitrator that's in charge at that point is security. At some point that job will get so bad that you'll walk in one day and say, and you'll hear the first bit of criticism from your boss or whatever it is, and you'll walk straight out again and hand your notes in. And you'll flip so far from one to the other state. That's not helpful either, because, okay, you're free. So what's happened is the security arbitrator has been pushed out of position by the freedom arbitrator. That means there's a high-level arbitrator. There's something even higher level than freedom and security, which is negotiating or arbitrating between the two, based on the belief or maybe the misconception that you can't have both. You can't have freedom and security. And that would be an example of a person's life experience, that the only time they've had security is when they had an employed job. And they've heard lots of stories about people who became self-employed and then, their businesses failed within months and it was terrible. So there's good reason for staying within the job, because it's secure and it's predictable and it's reliable and so on. So what we really want to do is get to that person to the point where they understand what it is that's driving their behaviour, that's driving their belief that they can't leave the job, that they can't get security anywhere else, or that's driving their belief that the only way they're going to have freedom is to work for themselves. It's entirely possible to have freedom and work in a full-time job. And there are many tools that you have at disposal that will help you to do that. I mean, here's one of them. This amazing piece of equipment will enable you to be completely free within any office environment. All you have to do is spend your entire working day walking around the office carrying a piece of paper, and nobody will ever question where you're going or what you're doing. Even better still, if you can walk a little bit briskly and put an expression on your face as if you're a little bit flustered, a little bit hurried, like you're going somewhere really important. And when I worked in the corporate world, in the telecoms industry, I would spend whole days walking around an office with a piece of paper in my hand, go and chat to different people, go and have a cup of tea, go and take a couple of tea breaks. even leave the building. In one job, I used to get in the morning, put my coat on the back of my chair and go out again. And nobody ever asked where I was. Probably not wise to start doing that on your first day in the job. Maybe leave it a little while for them to develop some trust and faith that, you know, you're a good, solid, reliable employee. But past that point, they won't question what you're doing. So we have the idea that you can't have freedom in a full-time job, and you can't have security if you're self-employed. And the conflict between those ideas that can't be resolved by the arbitrator that has those rules built into it means that the situation's got to get really, really bad, or you've got to wait for an amazing opportunity like winning the lottery to come along before you'll consider starting your own business. That you'll end up stuck in that place of imbalance and indecision. And so if we're helping people to understand what the rules are for how they're going to go about making such a decision, then they can start planning early. I mean, when I left my most recent corporate job, which was 2002, I'd spent probably 2 years stockpiling stationery and office furniture and office equipment in preparation for being self-employed. I actually still have stationery now, 18 years later, that I stockpiled back then, sticky labels and things like that. And I'm sure I've still got some sort of office equipment. I mean, the laptop and the printer and the mobile phone are long gone, seriously. I had one job where I'd seriously think I could have kept the company car and nobody would have noticed. So we go through life indoctrinated to think that we're so constrained and with what we're able to do and what we're allowed to do. And where there's an arbitrator that says, don't test the rules, otherwise you'll get into trouble. Isn't it time to see for yourself, to check for yourself? And that's essentially what we're doing. We're reprogramming the rules in the arbitrator to make more valuable and more useful decisions for you. So it's no longer a dilemma, a conflict between freedom and security. It's entirely possible to have both at the same time. And then the question becomes, okay, how do we do that? Now, in this example, somebody who's working at this sort of ethereal, metaphorical level of values might say your values are freedom and security. Well, that's probably everybody's values. And values are entirely context dependent. You only value freedom when you don't have it. You only value security when you don't have it. And when you're caught in that dilemma, that balance between the two, you fear that both are at risk. And that's what keeps a person in that point of conflict, in that point of inaction. So I would say to you that values are not important in themselves. Freedom and security are not important. Freedom and security, they are just sounds. Sounds that we call words and attach great meaning to. But they are just sounds attached to experiences. They are anchors. Freedom is an anchor. Security is an anchor. And if we were to play those both at the same time, you would recognize that, of course, as an auditory squash. Then we would potentially integrate those rules at some level and create a new arbitration rule that says, okay, how do I get both freedom and security at the same time? What do I need to do? Metaphorically, you might say we're working at the level of values. I would say we're not. We're just using a different way of defining or describing the user interface that we're using to change the way that those neurons are connected at the lower levels. However you want to describe it is up to you, of course. But I would say that I would urge you not to get lost in the metaphors and believe the metaphors to be real. That by all means use the metaphor of values with clients, but understand in your own mind what it is that you are really doing. And so if you think about all the conflict resolution techniques within NLP, which to some degree is all of them, and those techniques apply equally to conflict within the person, intrapersonal conflict, and conflict between two people, interpersonal conflict. And we can use all of NLP's techniques between two people with a little bit of adaptation.